in the scorching heart of the Arizona Territory, where the sun beats down mercilessly and water is more precious than gold, desperation can drive a soul to the very edge of humanity. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a mother whose love for her dying child led her to offer everything she had, her freedom, her dignity, her very life, to a stranger, and of Thomas "Silent Tom" Brennan, a man whose own scars had taught him that true strength lies not in taking what's offered, but in giving what's needed. In a land where survival often meant stepping on others to stay alive, these two broken souls would discover that sometimes the greatest act of defiance against a cruel world is simple human kindness. Before we journey into this tale of sacrifice and redemption, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories of hope in the darkest places deserve to be shared with every heart that still believes in the power of compassion. The Arizona sun hung like a merciless eye in the cloudless sky, its rays turning the desert floor into a shimmering furnace that could kill a man in hours. The year was 1884, and the territory was still a harsh, unforgiving place where only the strongest, or the most desperate, dared to venture. Sarah Mitchell stumbled across the cracked earth, her once blue dress now faded to the color of dust and despair. In her arms, she carried her 4-year-old son, Timothy. The boy's small body was limp against her chest, his breathing shallow and labored. His lips, once pink and full of laughter, were now cracked and pale. 3 days. It had been 3 days since their wagon had broken down, since the wheel had snapped and sent them tumbling into this hellish landscape. 3 days since her husband David had kissed them both goodbye and set out on foot to find help, promising to return before nightfall. That was the last time she had seen him. Sarah's own lips were split and bleeding, her tongue swollen in her mouth, like leather left too long in the sun. Every step sent waves of agony through her blistered feet, but she kept walking. Timothy's life depended on it. She and David had come west from Boston, seeking a new beginning after his business had failed, carrying their life savings and dreams of starting fresh in California. Now those dreams lay scattered in the desert wind like dust. "Mama," Timothy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sure, baby," Sarah croaked. "Mama's going to find help." It was then, as she crested a small rise, that she saw it, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. Fire meant hope. As she drew closer, the source became clear, a small ranch house, low and adobe built, designed to withstand the desert's fury. There were corrals with horses, a well with a wooden bucket, and most beautiful of all, the green of a small vegetable garden. Sarah's legs finally gave out 50 yards from the house. She fell to her knees, clutching Timothy to her chest, and used the last of her strength to cry out, "Help!" The word tore from her throat like a prayer. "Please, my son." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who had spent his life under the desert sun. His hair was dark with threads of silver, and his face was marked by lines that spoke of both hardship and solitude. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They were the color of storm clouds, and they held a depth of understanding. Thomas Brennan took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. Without a word, he strode to the well and drew up a bucket of cool, clear water. "Easy now," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "You're safe." Sarah looked up at him with eyes that held the wild desperation of a mother watching her child die. "Please," she whispered. "My son. He needs water. I'll do anything. I'll work for you, cook for you, clean for you. I'll be your servant for the rest of my life if you'll just save my boy." Thomas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. "No slaves here," he said quietly, but his hands were already gentle as he took Timothy from her arms. "Let's get this boy some water." Sarah watched through tears of relief as Thomas carefully tilted the bucket to Timothy's lips, letting just a few drops at a time trickle into the child's mouth. "Slow and steady," Thomas murmured. "He'll be all right. You both will." As Timothy's breathing grew stronger and his color began to return, Sarah felt the last of her strength leave her. The world tilted and spun, and she would have fallen if Thomas hadn't caught her. "When did you last eat?" he asked. 2 days. Maybe 3. I gave Timothy everything. Thomas nodded, understanding. "Come on. Let's get you both inside." The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean, with thick adobe walls that kept out the desert heat. Thomas laid Timothy on a bed and continued giving him small sips of water while Sarah collapsed into a chair. "My husband," she said suddenly. "David. He went for help 3 days ago. He might still be out there." Thomas's expression grew grim. 3 days in the desert without water was a death sentence for most men. "I'll look for him," he promised. "Tomorrow when the heat breaks." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her dust-caked cheeks. "I meant what I said. I'll work for you. Do whatever you need." "No," Thomas said firmly but not unkindly. "You don't owe me anything. This is what people do for each other." Sarah stared at him in confusion. In her world of Boston society, everything had a price. "I don't understand," she whispered. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I had a family once. A wife and daughter. They died of fever while I was away on business. When I came home, they were already buried." He paused, his hands clenching. "I learned something that day. The only thing that matters is being there for each other when it counts. You don't owe me anything because this is what we do. We help each other survive." As the sun set over the desert, Sarah held her sleeping son and watched Thomas prepare a simple meal. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that they might actually live through this nightmare. Dawn broke over the desert like a gentle blessing, the harsh heat of the previous day giving way to the cool, sweet air of early morning. Sarah woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen and the smell of coffee brewing. Simple pleasures that seemed like miracles after 3 days of hell. Timothy was still sleeping beside her, his breathing steady and strong. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his lips were no longer cracked and pale. Sarah touched his forehead gently, relief flooding through her as she felt the normal warmth of healthy sleep. "He's going to be fine," Thomas said quietly from the doorway, holding a steaming cup in his weathered hands. "Children bounce back faster than adults. Give him another day of rest and good food, and he'll be running around like nothing happened." Sarah sat up carefully, mindful not to wake her son. "I can't believe he's alive. Yesterday I thought." She couldn't finish the sentence. "But he is alive," Thomas said simply, his voice carrying the wisdom of a man who had learned to focus on what was rather than what might have been. "That's what matters now." He handed her coffee, and Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully, feeling the heat seep into her bones. "I have to ask," she said hesitantly, her voice still hoarse from the ordeal. "My husband, are you really going to look for him? I know it's dangerous, and you don't even know us." Thomas nodded, his expression serious and resolute. "I gave you my word, Mrs. Mitchell. I'll ride out this morning, follow the most likely routes he might have taken. If he's out there, if there's any chance at all, I'll find him." After breakfast, Thomas saddled his horse and prepared to ride out in search of David. Sarah watched from the porch as he checked his supplies methodically: water, food, a rifle, and a shovel that made her stomach clench with dread. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, his voice steady and reassuring. "Keep the boy inside during the heat of the day, and don't hesitate to use whatever you need." The day passed slowly, each hour marked by the climbing sun and Sarah's growing anxiety. Timothy, his energy restored by food and water, was fascinated by everything around him. He chased the chickens around the yard with delighted laughter, petted the horses through the corral fence, and peppered his mother with endless questions. "Mama, why does Mr. Tom live all by himself?" he asked as they sat in the shade of the porch, watching the desert shimmer in the afternoon heat. Sarah considered how to answer, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups need to be alone for a while, sweetheart. Mr. Tom is a very kind man, but he's also very sad about something that happened to him." "Why is he sad?" "Because he lost someone very important to him, someone he loved very much." Timothy thought about this with the serious consideration that children bring to weighty matters. "Then we should be extra nice to him," he declared with the simple wisdom of childhood. So he won't be so sad anymore. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sarah found herself watching the desert anxiously for any sign of Thomas's return. The vast emptiness seemed to stretch forever, offering no clues about what news he might bring. It was just as the sky was beginning to turn orange that she saw the dust cloud on the horizon, growing larger as it approached. As it drew closer, she could make out Thomas on his horse, but her heart sank as she realized he was alone. Thomas dismounted slowly, his face grim but compassionate. Sarah didn't need to ask. She could see the answer written in his storm-gray eyes. "I found him," Thomas said quietly, glancing at Timothy, who was playing nearby with a wooden stick. "About 10 miles north of here, near a dry creek bed. It was peaceful, Mrs. Mitchell. The heat got him, but he didn't suffer." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the last of her old life slip away like sand through her fingers. David was gone. Her husband, her partner, the father of her child gone. She was truly alone now, a widow with a small child in a land that showed no mercy to the weak. "I'm sorry," Thomas continued, his voice gentle with genuine sympathy. "I buried him proper, said some words over the grave. If you want, I can take you there tomorrow to pay your respects." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She felt Timothy's small hand slip into hers, and she squeezed it gently, drawing strength from his innocent presence. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the desert horizon where the sun was painting the sky in brilliant colors. "That's up to you," he said finally. "You can stay here as long as you need to, as long as it takes to figure out what comes next." "I can't impose on your kindness forever," Sarah said, though the thought of leaving this sanctuary terrified her. "I have no money, no way to pay you back for what you've already done." "I told you yesterday. You don't owe me anything," Thomas replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "But I do," Sarah insisted, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "You saved our lives. You're giving us shelter when we have nowhere else to go. That has to count for something in this world." Thomas turned to look at her, and Sarah was surprised by the intensity in his storm-gray eyes. "You want to know what it counts for? It counts for me being able to look at myself in the mirror each morning. It counts for me knowing that when someone needed help, I was there to give it. That's payment enough for any decent man." That night, as Timothy slept peacefully in the bed Thomas had given up for them, Sarah sat on the porch and stared up at the stars. The desert night was cool and clear, with more stars visible than she had ever seen in Boston, a canopy of light that seemed to promise that beauty could exist even in the harshest places. She thought about David, about the dreams they had shared and the life they had planned together. All of that was gone now, buried in the desert sand along with her husband's body. But she was still alive, and so was Timothy. They had been given a second chance at life, and Sarah was determined not to waste the precious gift they had been given. 2 weeks had passed since Thomas had brought news of David's death, and Sarah was beginning to understand the rhythm of life on the desert ranch. She woke each morning before dawn, drawn by the cool air and the promise of a few precious hours before the heat became unbearable. Thomas was always up before her, moving quietly through his morning routines. Despite his continued insistence that she owed him nothing, Sarah had quietly begun contributing to the household in ways that felt natural rather than obligatory. She cooked meals that were more elaborate than Thomas's simple fare, mended clothes that had been neglected for too long, and tended the vegetable garden with careful attention. Timothy had adapted to ranch life with the remarkable resilience of childhood. He followed Thomas around like a devoted shadow, asking endless questions about the horses, the chickens, and the mysterious workings of desert survival. Thomas, who had initially seemed uncomfortable around the boy, gradually warmed to his constant companion. "Mr. Tom," Timothy said one morning as they fed the chickens together, "why don't you have any kids of your own?" Sarah, who was hanging laundry nearby, froze at the innocent question. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that Timothy's natural curiosity would eventually lead him to ask about the toy horse on the shelf and the extra chair at the table. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, scattering grain for the chickens with careful precision. I did have a little girl once, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Her name was Elena, and she was about your age. Where is she now? Timothy asked with the directness that only children possess. She's in heaven, with her mama, Thomas replied, his voice growing softer with memory. They're watching over us from up there. Timothy considered this with a serious expression he wore when processing difficult concepts. Do you miss her every day? Every day, Thomas admitted, his honesty raw and unguarded. I bet she's happy that you're taking care of me and Mama now, Timothy said with the simple certainty of a child who believed in the goodness of the world. That afternoon, while Timothy napped in the heat of the day, Sarah found Thomas repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by the relentless desert wind. She approached him carefully, carrying a cup of cool water from the well. Thank you, he said, accepting the water gratefully and drinking deeply. This heat takes it out of you, no matter how long you've lived with it. Thomas, Sarah said, using his first name for the first time, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer. He looked up from his work, wariness flickering in his gray eyes. What is it? How long can we stay here? Really? I know you keep saying we don't owe you anything, but I also know that feeding 3 people instead of 1, using more water, more supplies, it has to be putting a strain on your resources. Thomas set down his tools and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Sarah, I'm not going to throw you and Timothy out into the desert. You don't need to worry about that. That's not what I'm asking, Sarah said firmly, her voice growing stronger with determination. I'm asking because I need a plan for the future. I need to figure out what kind of life I can build for my son. Thomas studied her face, seeing the determination there, the strength that had carried her across the desert with a dying child in her arms. What are you thinking about? Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she was about to propose. I'm thinking that maybe we could make this arrangement more permanent, not as charity, but as a real partnership between equals. What kind of partnership? Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. You need help running this place. I can see it in the way you're stretched thin, trying to do everything yourself. The garden could be twice as productive with proper attention. The house could be better maintained, and Timothy needs a father figure. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Security, a home for my son, a chance to build something meaningful instead of just surviving day to day. Sarah, Thomas said carefully, his voice heavy with the weight of old pain. Are you talking about marriage? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and possibilities that neither had dared to voice until now. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she forced herself to meet his gaze directly. I'm talking about a practical arrangement between 2 people who could benefit from each other's company and skills. If that eventually becomes something more. She shrugged, trying to appear more casual than she felt. Well, stranger things have happened in this territory. Before Thomas could respond, Timothy's voice called out from the house, high and excited. Mama, Mr. Tom, come quick. There are riders coming. They hurried toward the house, where Timothy was standing on the porch pointing excitedly toward the horizon. In the distance, a dust cloud was approaching, but this one was different from the solitary rider Thomas had been. This was bigger, suggesting multiple horses and riders moving with purpose. Thomas's expression grew grim as he shaded his eyes against the sun, his body tensing with the instincts of a man who had learned to recognize danger. Trouble, he said simply. Get Timothy inside, and stay away from the windows. The riders pulled up in front of the house, 5 men on horseback, all armed and riding with the aggressive posture of those accustomed to taking what they wanted. The leader was a large man with a black beard and clothes that had seen better days, his eyes cold and calculating. Afternoon, he called out, his voice carrying a false friendliness that fooled no one. Name's Jake Morrison. These are my associates. We're looking for a place to water our horses and maybe get a hot meal. Thomas stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. Water's free to any traveler, he said, but I'm not running a restaurant. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's mighty inhospitable of you, friend. We've been riding hard for days, and we're powerful hungry. There's a town about 20 miles south, Thomas replied evenly. They've got a proper restaurant there. 20 miles is a long way in this heat, Morrison said, his tone growing harder and more threatening. Seems to me a neighborly man would be more accommodating. I'm not feeling particularly neighborly today, Thomas said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable warning. Morrison's facade dropped completely, revealing the predator beneath the mask. We're not asking anymore, friend. We're telling. My boys and I are going to water our horses, eat your food, and spend the night. You'd be surprised what I can do about it, Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a man who had faced such moments before. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, and Thomas's rifle came up with fluid motion, the barrel finding its target with practiced ease. I wouldn't if I were you, Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. I've got you dead to rights, and my fingers getting mighty itchy. You can't watch all of us at once, Morrison said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice now. Don't need to watch all of you. Just need to watch you. Funny thing about men like your associates, they lose their enthusiasm real quick when their leaders' brains are decorating the desert floor. Finally, Morrison remounted his horse with as much dignity as he could muster, his face flushed with frustrated rage. This isn't over, friend. Yes, it is, Thomas said simply, his voice carrying absolute finality. If I see any of you on my land again, I won't bother with conversation. As the riders disappeared into the desert heat, Thomas remained on the porch until they were completely gone. Thomas, Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with new understanding. My offer still stands. Maybe now more than ever. You shouldn't have to face this kind of thing alone. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, seeing the determination in her eyes, the way she stood protectively close to her son while still offering to share his burden. Sarah, he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of decision, if we do this, if we really do this, there's no going back. This isn't Boston society. Out here, when you make a commitment, it's for life. Are you sure you understand what you're asking for? Sarah thought of David, of the life they had planned and lost to the desert's cruel indifference. She thought of the desert that had nearly claimed her and Timothy, and of the man who had saved them without asking for anything in return. I understand, she said firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. The question is, do you? Are you ready to take on a family again? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Sarah to Timothy and back again. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would change all their lives forever. I reckon we better start planning a wedding, he said simply, and for the first time in years, his smile reached his eyes. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Morrison and his men, and the small ranch had been transformed into something that felt like a real home. The wedding had been a simple affair, just Sarah, Thomas, Timothy, and the circuit preacher who passed through the territory twice a year. But the vows they had spoken carried the weight of genuine commitment, born not from passion but from mutual respect. The changes were visible everywhere around the ranch. The vegetable garden had doubled in size under Sarah's careful tending, providing not just sustenance, but a small surplus that could be traded in town for supplies. The house itself had been expanded with a small addition that gave Timothy his own room, complete with the wooden toy horse that Thomas had finally taken down from the shelf. But perhaps the most significant change was in Thomas himself. The silent, solitary man who had saved them from the desert was still there, but he had been joined by someone warmer, more open to the possibilities that life could offer. Sarah had watched him slowly emerge from the shell of grief he had built around himself. On this particular morning, Sarah woke to the sound of voices outside, Thomas and Timothy working together to repair a section of the chicken coop that had been damaged in the previous night's windstorm. Through the window, she could see her son hanging on Thomas's every word as the older man explained the proper way to secure the wire mesh. See, Timothy, the trick is to make sure the wire overlaps here, Thomas was saying, his voice patient and instructive. That way, even if one section comes loose, the rest will hold strong. Like how you and Mama take care of each other. Timothy asked with the innocent wisdom that never failed to surprise the adults in his life. Thomas paused in his work, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Exactly like that, son. We look out for each other, and that makes us all stronger. Son. The word still sent a warm flutter through Sarah's chest every time she heard it. Thomas had never formally adopted Timothy, but in every way that mattered, he had become the boy's father. As they sat down to breakfast, Sarah noticed Thomas, glancing repeatedly toward the window, his expression thoughtful and alert. She had learned to read his moods over the past months. "What is it?" she asked quietly, setting down her coffee cup. "Riders coming," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral but watchful. 3 of them, from the south, moving at a steady pace. Sarah felt her stomach clench with familiar fear, the memory of Morrison's visit still fresh in her mind. Since that confrontation, any unexpected visitors made her nervous. But as the riders drew closer, Thomas's expression relaxed slightly, recognition dawning in his storm-gray eyes. "It's all right," he said, his voice carrying relief. "I recognize one of them. It's Sheriff Martinez from town." Sheriff Carlos Martinez was a good man, one of the few lawmen in the territory who took his job seriously. If he was riding out to their ranch, it was either official business or a social call, both of which were preferable to the alternative. Thomas went out to greet the visitors, while Sarah and Timothy watched from the window. The conversation was too distant to hear clearly, but Sarah could read the body language well enough to know that this was official business, but not the kind that suggested immediate danger. After a few minutes, Thomas returned to the house with Sheriff Martinez and his 2 deputies. The sheriff was a man in his 40s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life under the desert sun. His expression was serious, but not hostile. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, touching his hat respectfully as he entered their home. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I have some news that concerns your family." "What kind of news?" Sarah asked, her protective instincts immediately alert. "The good kind mostly," Martinez said with a slight smile. "We've been tracking Jake Morrison and his gang for the past 2 months. Turns out they've been hitting isolated ranches and homesteads all across the territory." Sarah felt her heart begin to race, memories of that terrifying confrontation flooding back. "Yesterday, we finally caught up with them about 50 miles north of here," Martinez continued. "They made the mistake of hitting the wrong ranch, one belonging to a retired cavalry officer who didn't take kindly to uninvited guests. When the shooting stopped, Morrison was dead and the rest of his gang was either dead or in custody." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her like cool water in the desert heat. The threat that had been hanging over their heads was finally gone. "There's more," Martinez continued. "We found evidence that Morrison's gang was responsible for at least a dozen attacks over the past year. There's a reward for their capture, $500, to be split among those who provided information leading to their arrest." "We didn't provide any information," Thomas said, confusion evident in his voice. "Actually, you did," Martinez replied, pulling out a small notebook. "Your description of Morrison and his men, along with the details of their attempted robbery here, helped us track their movements and predict where they might strike next." $500 was a significant sum in the territory, enough to make real improvements to the ranch, to buy better equipment, to secure their future. "There's one more thing," Martinez said, his expression growing more serious. "We found something among Morrison's possessions that I think belongs to you, Mrs. Brennan." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch, worn and familiar. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was David's money pouch, the one he had been carrying when he set out to find help. "Morrison must have found your husband's body and taken this," Martinez explained gently. "There's about $200 inside, probably your life savings from back east." Sarah accepted the pouch with trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't just the money. It was the connection to David, the knowledge that this piece of their old life had somehow found its way back to her. After the sheriff and his deputies had left, Sarah sat on the porch with the leather pouch in her hands. Thomas settled beside her, his presence comforting and solid. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. I'm thinking about David, Sarah said honestly. About the dreams we had when we started west. We wanted to build something lasting, something we could pass on to Timothy. We never made it to California, but maybe we found something better. Thomas followed her gaze, taking in the thriving garden, the well-maintained buildings, the sense of home that permeated everything around them. I think David would be proud of what you've built here, what we've built together. I think so too, Sarah said. And I think Maria and Elena would be happy to know that their home is filled with laughter and love again. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the table that now had 3 chairs instead of 2, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. Timothy was chattering excitedly about his upcoming writing lesson, his face bright with the joy of a child who felt completely secure in his world. Thomas listened with the patient attention of a man who had learned to treasure such moments. Mama, Timothy said suddenly, are we going to live here forever? Sarah exchanged a glance with Thomas, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Forever was a long time, and the frontier was an uncertain place. But they had built something strong here, something worth fighting for. I think so, sweetheart, she said. This is our home now, our real home. Good, Timothy said with simple satisfaction. I like it here. I like having a papa and chickens and horses and everything. I like being a family. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to the desert as a desperate woman offering to sell herself into servitude to save her child's life. She had found instead a man who understood that true strength came not from taking what was offered, but from giving what was needed. Thomas, Sarah said as they prepared for bed that night, do you ever regret it? Taking us in, marrying me, taking on the responsibility of a ready-made family? Thomas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Sarah, the day you stumbled into my yard with Timothy in your arms was the day my life started again. I thought I was saving you, but the truth is, you saved me. You and Timothy brought this place back to life. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I love you, Thomas Brennan. Not because I have to, not because it's practical, but because you're a good man who deserves to be loved. I love you too, Sarah, more than I ever thought I could love anyone again. As they held each other in the darkness, listening to the desert wind whisper through the sage brush and the distant call of coyotes singing to the moon, Sarah knew that they had found something rare and precious in this harsh land. They had found a second chance at happiness, built on the foundation of kindness. In the morning, Timothy would have his writing lesson, the garden would need tending, and the endless work of frontier life would continue. But they would face it together as a family, with the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful things in life grew from the harshest soil. And there you have it, folks, a story that proves the most powerful force in the unforgiving frontier wasn't the gun or the fist, but the simple act of human kindness. Sarah offered everything she had to save her son, but Thomas showed her that true strength lies not in taking what's offered, but in giving what's needed. If this tale of second chances and unexpected families touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope and redemption from the American West. Because sometimes, the greatest treasures aren't found in gold mines or cattle drives. They're found in the courage to open your heart to strangers who become family. Until next time, keep believing in the power of kindness to transform even the harshest landscapes into home.